Hi everybody, my name is Nila Ashraf. I'm from Stand Up to Racism. I'm going to be chairing tonight's meeting, and I want to welcome you all from wherever you are across the country watching this. Tonight, this is a Fringe meeting for Stand Up to Racism, where we're coming from the Trade Union Conference, Trade Unions Congress, which is an organisation. Office of the Trade Union Movement represents 6 million workers across the country, and I think it's absolutely fantastic that we're having this meeting. Normally, obviously, it would be in a particular location and people would attend that were at the conference, but obviously with lockdown, we are all doing this remotely, but the advantage is that people can join in wherever you are. So hopefully we'll have a great meeting. We've got a great panel of speakers. Just to explain what we're going to do, I will introduce each speaker as they come up, and they'll have an opportunity to speak, and you can add your comments on Facebook and on YouTube, and we'll hopefully share those comments with everybody this evening. So really pleased to announce our first speaker, who is our footballer, Shaka Hislop. He's a footballer, but he also works really closely with Show, raising the red card, so he's going to join us now.
Am I sorry? Yeah. I'm okay. You hear me fine. Thank you very much, Nelia, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. As I was introduced, my name is Shaka Hislop. I'm the honorary president and one of the founding patrons of Show Racism the Red Card, an organization that I proudly boast is England's leading educational-based anti-racism charity. It's one that we founded some 25 years ago now, just short, a couple of months short of our 25th anniversary. I'm delighted to see Jed Grebby, the CEO, on this call as well. It was Jed who contacted me back in 1995, detailing some of the work that they were doing in the Northeast, and invited me to be a part. It spoke to who I was, who I believe my responsibility was as a footballer in the community at the time. It also spoke of my experiences in England, and in particular, in this case, in the Northeast. Before meeting Jed and talking to Jed about this initiative, I was stopped outside a gas station, just outside St. James's Park, filling up the car with gas, and 3 white youths come walking down the hill outside St. James's Park and started shouting racial abuse to me. As they got closer, they recognized who I was, started chanting my name, asked if they could come over for autographs, a request I politely denied and left as quickly as I could. But it spoke to who I was, and the duality of being Black and still being a footballer, how I could be recognized or abused as a Black man in the street, but then in the very next breath, and in this case, literally praised as a footballer while standing in that very same spot. And that was the underpinning of our work, and continues to be. We started by going around the Northeast, touring schools, usually with one of my teammates in tow. I also add that everybody in the dressing room gave up their time willingly, as did the club, in supporting all that we were doing, and speaking to kids. And our experience in speaking to kids in schools at times felt was more rewarding and more enlightening to us as grown-ups, as members of that community, and that gave us the motivation to continue the work that we're doing. Now, some 25 years on, we are all over the United Kingdom. We are interacting with thousands of kids annually, and feeling that we are having an impact in those communities that we first started to and first felt we could make a difference with. We are changing our communities, our country, our world, one student at a time. I don't feel there's been any better work that I've been involved with or anything that I am more proud of in my lifetime. But now, some 25 years on, we find ourselves in this moment, a moment that has the pandemic and quarantine and lockdowns as its backdrop, a moment that's seen an uprising and an uplifting of Black lives. Some 7 years after the Black Lives Matter movement was first founded, it's odd that Black Lives Matter is still seen by so many as a controversial statement. Black Lives Matter seems to invoke a response in some that is hard for me to express and hard for me to recognize that we're still having that conversation in 2020. But still, you also see the response of people recognizing what so many in the Black community have complained about for so long, underpinned by the murder of George Floyd and the vision of a police officer kneeling on his neck, and contrast that with Colin Kaepernick kneeling before games in protest of exactly that. We are now 4 years in from Colin Kaepernick first taking a knee, and how that was received and how that was responded to from the highest podiums in politics. And here we are having these conversations, and players in the Premier League, as they were before, towards the end of last season, taking a knee and having the Black Lives Matter patches on their arms. And we are recognizing the need for that uplifting of, at this moment, Black lives. And it speaks to the human rights that affect us all, that are interconnected in this moment. An uplifting of Black lives and the human rights around Black bodies is an uplifting of all human rights, of asylum seekers, of immigrants, of women, of the LGBTQ community, of everybody in the BAME community. And that's what we're seeing. My overused cliche is a rising tide lifts all boats. And at this moment, Black Lives Matter is that rising tide. So I'd like to leave you with that. And finally, just a letter from Martin Luther King, a letter from a Birmingham jail, is one that I read some years ago, and I feel describes this moment perfectly. How we are to equip ourselves for this fight, for this moment, for continuing to stand for and fight for what we believe is right, and in shaping the community that we want to leave to our own children. I have a feeling I might be over my time now. Thank you very much for your ear. Thank you very much for your time. I'll close by saying I can't stay on for the entirety of this call, but I will be here for a moment and happy to continue to participate and contribute as chair allows me.
Thanks very much for that, Shaka. Thanks so much for joining us today. And I know that obviously there's a 5-hour time difference, so it's great that you could be here. And I just want to say it's so good that you're speaking out, because while we have football and sports players now coming out and speaking out on the back of the Black Lives Matter movement, you were speaking out years before, so you've been a real trailblazer. And I just want to read out a couple of comments that we're already getting. So Dave has messaged in to say, excellent work, Shaka. Very important in combating racism. We've also got something here from Lorraine. Some people are offended by diversity, saying Black Lives Matter on stage. I don't understand it. She also goes on to say Black Lives Matter, unity is strength. So thanks very much for all the comments coming in. Please continue with those comments. Let's make sure we have a fantastic meeting today. So I do want to introduce our next speaker. It's Wilf Sullivan, who's a TUC Race Equality Officer and obviously absolutely key to the work that Stand Up to Racism does with the trade union TUC. So Will, over to you.
Thanks. I'd just like to welcome everybody to this meeting, really, on behalf of the TUC and TUC Congress. You know, I think there's a couple of things that I want to address in my remarks. Firstly, about what the TUC is doing, and secondly, about what the government is doing, and thirdly, what that means for all of us. Because today at Congress, the TUC launched an anti-racism task group. You know, I think the George Floyd incident marked a recognition for everybody that we needed to talk about race and racial inequalities and how to tackle them once again, and move away from a narrative which was about demonizing Black communities as terrorists and the enemy within. That group is also a recognition within the trade union movement that although some things have been done, there's still a lot of things that we need to do, both in terms of how we fight for racial justice with employers and what we do within the movement. And in that sense, the task group, three of the things that the task group will be doing will be to look at agree actions across unions and the TUC to increase representation of Black trade union members at all levels of the movement, because we're not present at all levels of the movement. To demonstrate the leadership of the unions on race equality by agreeing expectations of membership of the TUC. At the Stephen Lawrence task group 20 years ago, the TUC at that particular point made it a rule that unions had to demonstrate that they were working on equality to retain membership. And, you know, it will be that kind of discussion about what unions need to do in terms of race. And agree campaign priorities for securing legislative change and government intervention to eliminate race discrimination at work. And I think that's vitally important as well, because to be frank, I'm sick to death of lack of government action. I've been working in this line for 30 years, more than 30 years. And I think it's quite significant that the last report that the government commissioned into racism in employment by somebody that they felt was a fellow traveller, Ruby McGregor-Smith, she ended up titling "The Time for Talking is Over and Now is the Time to Act." Not that anybody was listening at the time. And what we have is a situation where, despite the fact that that report with a load of recommendations was published in February 2017, not a single thing has been done by this government. I'm sick to death of when it comes to race, politicians and policymakers wanting to pretend that we live in some kind of a meritocracy, and it's only the deficiencies of Black people that hold us back. I'm sick to death that actually those in power think that they need to validate our experiences when we say we suffer from racism, and that what they need to do is send a number of researchers to see whether what we're talking about is valid and whether therefore they have to do something about it. And I'm sick to death of them thinking that doing something about race discrimination means commissioning yet another report. And that's what we've seen so far in response to Black deaths in COVID. You know, reports being commissioned, the latest being the commission on race equality, which is supposed to support in December. And let me just take a moment to talk about a couple of the things that commission has been charged with doing, and so how it's ridiculous. Firstly, one of it's to build on the race disparity audit, all which I would want to remind people was just a government department that pulled together a load of figures, didn't actually do anything. To establish where the greatest evidence-based persistent where there are the greatest evidence-based persistent disparities between ethnic groups. It's not a question of disparities between ethnic groups. It's a question of discrimination and how that works in the labour market. and how people are exploited as a result of that race discrimination. And secondly, examine the case of persistent disparities, considering racism, discrimination, as well as other factors, including income, gender, age, geography, and occupation. Well, I have to say, you know, after 500 years, if the British don't understand where racism comes from and why it persists, being the company of slavery, colonialism, and empire, the country that promoted eugenics and built a system of racialized capitalism, then I don't know where they've been for the last 500 years, because it's obvious why racism exists in our society and how it works. And I'm sick up with government politicians and policymakers saying we don't understand. To consider how greater integration and addressing segregation within communities can contribute to addressing disadvantage is faced by some groups. And the problem, once again, we see this integration argument rolled out. How can you integrate into a society that rejects you? How can you integrate into a society which is happy to place certain groups on the margins in a way that means that the communities live in persistent poverty? And that is the kind of response that, despite the killing of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, despite the protests about racial inequality that we're getting. But this isn't a question just about community. This is a question about what kind of world we want to live in. And the pandemic has shown the gross inequalities and gross differences in life experience that people are subjected to in our society. You know, if we truly want to say that we live in a democracy, that means that everybody has to be included. Everybody's needs need to be taken account for. If we really want to say that we live in a civilized society, right, we can't have a society where some people, as a matter of policy, in the case of asylum seekers, are impoverished in the hope that they will just leave the country. That actually we think it's perfectly acceptable to have a conversation about using our armed forces to stop people who are trying to escape war and deprivation and have a better life, to stop them actually having access to our country. Ultimately, the trade unionism is about those things. It is about democracy. It's about workers having a voice, and not just having a voice, having a powerful voice to be able to decide their futures, to be able to actually reap the benefits of their labour. And we have to remember that, because actually the things that we've changed haven't been handed down from those that are in power. We've had to fight for them. And so it will be with racial justice. Yes, we have to protest, but we also have to organise. We have to organise in our communities, and just as importantly, and very importantly, we have to organise in the workplace, because we spend a third of our lives, if not more, in the workplace, in a situation where many in the Black community are grossly and super exploited. If we are going to change this, we have to combine and use our power to say enough is enough. And this is not acceptable anymore. Because no commission, no policy, no philanthropist is going to solve this problem for us. It's down to us to organise and make sure that we make the change that we want to see. Thank you.
Will, thanks so much for that. And so, right, this is all about organising, and hopefully that's what today's meeting is about. And I just want to read out a few messages that we've got coming in, and just to let people know that right now we've got over 200 people watching this via Skype, Facebook and YouTube. So please do keep your comments coming in, but just a few that have already come in. Tina says, Shaka's right, a rising tide floats all boats. Let's lift each other up. Well said. And then Heather says, I loved how Black Lives Matter, Stand Up to Racism and XR worked together in the Cardiff Justice demonstration last weekend, floats all boats. And then we've also got a message from North Stafford and Stoke against racism and fascism, and they're saying, say solidarity to all trade unions and activists fighting against racism. So do keep in your messages coming in. It's absolutely great to hear that people are watching and interacting with us tonight, and let's keep building a movement. But I want to introduce our next speaker. It's Kevin Courtney, and he's a General Secretary of the National Education Union. And so many of you would have seen Kevin all over the media fighting to defend all of us, but particularly those in the Black community who are being forced in because of government policies to send our children back to school. And I think it was absolutely fantastic that what the NEU did to make sure that our schools stay shut and that, you know, our families and our community stay safe. So Kevin, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation. I'm so pleased to be here at this meeting. Sorry we're not meeting in public, but it can mean you get a bigger audience. So I'm hello to the 200 people who are watching. My name's Kevin Courtney, and I'm the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, and fighting for safe schools and better schools and colleges. We're the 4th biggest union in the country, the biggest education union in Europe. And I'm really pleased that my union is affiliated to Stand Up to Racism and affiliated to Show Racism the Red Card, 2 organisations that we have worked with for a very long time and that we think do very important work. So if you're watching this and you're not already working with those organisations, I'd urge you to. I think it really matters for all unions to be involved in anti-racist work. Absolutely, unity is strength. We're in favour of the unity of workers, and you can't do unity of workers unless you're doing unity of black and white. But I think it's especially important for an education trades union. I say this a lot, you know, when teachers get kids, when support staff get kids coming into nursery classes, you can see that children aren't born with racism. They don't know what colour they are, and they've got friends across, you know, and then you see racist attitudes sometimes developing. And I think, so I want to say this, you can't be a good teacher unless you're an anti-racist. We have to fight for a conscious anti-racism. And I do think that what we have seen across this last year is these shocks to the system, the killing of George Floyd, which I know is not a shock. I know it's 400 years of history in the United States and it's constant, but sometimes there's, you know, one of them that they're kneeling on George's his windpipe for such a long time and murdering him is a shock to the system, and you see that shock. And then the shock of the COVID and the way the outcomes of COVID have been so different for different social classes and for different races. These are shocks to the system, and they come on top of the shock to the system where you see how climate change has such profoundly differentiated effects as well. Or on the micro level, in the exam scandal that we saw in our country this year, you know, every year 30% of kids, the system is set up so that 30% of children don't get a passing grade in their GCSE in English. We ration and we say that 30% of the kids won't get a passing grade. And you know who's in that 30%? The disadvantaged, and black kids are more in that group than they are elsewhere. So we've seen these shocks, I think, have pointed to direct racism, racial discrimination, racist attitudes. Some of it you call, you know, institutional, others direct in there. And it also points to the correlation, the overlap between the intersectionality between racial discrimination and class discrimination. And I think that's what underlies the, you know, both of those you see in the COVID statistics. You see that black people in our country are dying more than white people because they're more disadvantaged. And you also see that's not the explanation of why black doctors were dying more than white doctors, and it is about getting worse shifts and having poorer PPE, and it's direct racism as well. So both these systems, these things have happened, these shocks, and we have to shout out about them and mobilize. And you have to take some inspiration from the movement that has developed. The throwing of the Colston statue into Bristol Harbour, I mean, it shouldn't have to have been thrown in because it shouldn't have been there. But we want to take lessons from that. There's such good teaching opportunities to talk about who Colston was, not to ignore him, not to ignore history, but to look at the history of slave ownership and the way Bristol and many other cities in our country are founded on the sort of wealth that was stolen from African people in that slave trade and from the blood of African people in those things. So there are these shocks to the system which allow us to mobilize and which allow us to see that there is a better way to be. And while we are, and I think in the trades union movement and in lots of other movements, I heard people talking about Extinction Rebellion and other movements, there are other movements as well, but in the trades union movement, it's vital that we look at this and try and use these moments for good. But I have to say, you have to also be aware that there are people trying to use these moments for bad. And there are far-right governments in Brazil, in the United States, in other countries who are using the COVID moment to try and take society back. So we have to we've got to argue our way in our own movement. We've got to argue for an anti-racist practice in schools and in the trades union movement, because unity really is strength, and you cannot build a trades union unless it's unified. But as well as, we've got to do that. And we also have to be consciously working out how we fight against the growth of the far right. And I think both the organisations, Stand Up to Racism and Show Racism the Red Card, have a really important part in the work that we're doing around those issues. So I want to say that I'm really pleased to be here. I am, again, really pleased that my union is affiliated to both Stand Up to Racism and Show Racism the Red Card. I think we need a conscious anti-racism. I think it's really important to say we have to, and our movement has not done well enough at listening to the voices of Black people. My union now has the biggest Black educators conference in Europe. We have that Black educators conference brings motions to our conference. We've got a Black educators organizing forum. We're trying. We're not doing well. We're not doing enough. We're trying to build a movement to decolonize the curriculum. We've got an anti-racist framework that we're sending out that we want people to be talking about in schools. And we want to do that as well as talking about all the other issues we're talking about schools. It's really important to listen to the voice of Black people in those. But I also want to say it is vital that white people do not, the fight against racism is a fight for all of us. It is not the job of Black people to fight racism. It's the job of all of us. If we want to live in a halfway decent society, we have to fight racism wherever we see it, around middle-class dinner tables, around far-right mobilizations, around poor attitudes among some kids in schools. We have to fight racism everywhere we see it, and we have to look inside ourselves sometimes and challenge ourselves about our own attitudes. But most of all, Black and white unite and fight. Black and white unite and fight in the trades unions, against the bosses, on the streets, against the far right. Black and white kids fighting for a better education system in our schools. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak tonight.
Thanks very much for that, Kevin. And you're so right what you said. And I know there are lots of Stand Up to Racism groups across the country that are doing great work around decolonising the curriculum. So if people want to share some of the work you're doing, please do add to the chat and let us learn from each other's experiences. And we've got lots of messages while Kevin was speaking, so I'm just going to read out a few of them. So Keith says, solidarity from London Socialist History Group, time to take down the statues. And then Sally says, proud to be with Kevin in the NEU, especially for the refugee solidarity work. We've also got another one here. Alville says, Kevin's right, you can't be a good teacher without being anti-racist. And we've also got messages here from Tina says, I agree, it's not good enough. Sorry, I've read that one already. We've got some, so obviously we've got lots of trade union activists watching this tonight, and we've got a message here from Jess, who is a Debenhams worker from Manchester. She's saying solidarity for followers in Manchester. We've got Elizabeth, real solidarity from Unison, Black members, Deputy Chair for the Northwest BAME Labour Group as well. Will says education is everything. Kevin says we are family. We've also got messages of solidarity here from Angela, who's part of the CWU from Greater Merseyside branch. And we've got solidarity messages coming from Des from Nottingham CWU. So clearly we've got lots of different trade union activists joining this meeting from across the country, which is great. So please do keep bringing your messages in. We've got another message here from Suzanne, says, makes me proud to be an NEU member. Thanks, Kevin. And just to let people know, we were going to have Sarah Woolley speaking from the BFAWU, but unfortunately she's not able to attend tonight because some urgent trade union matter has come up, but she's an absolute key supporter of Stand Up to Racism, and we're really pleased to be working with her and her union over the years. So it's unfortunate she can't be here, but I'm sure she'll be in one of our future meetings. We've just got another message through from Roger, who says, struggle as workers is essential, change from below. No one is going to give it to us. And that's so right. If anybody was any doubt of that, you only have to see what happened in Bristol when they took down the statues. That had, that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't had the mass movement on the streets. It was really people power that made history in that moment. And I know we all celebrated wherever we were across the country to see that statue fall. And hopefully we're going to see a lot more statues coming down as well. So do please join what send us in your messages, keep sharing what's happening in your local groups. And I'm just going to read out a couple of more. We've got a message from Lorraine, who says, asylum seekers are treated as less than human. And it's really important we do remember that it is terrible the way this government is treating asylum seekers and refugees. And for that reason, Stand Up to Racism has called a National Day of Action on Saturday. So make sure you're all doing solidarity action around your areas and share what you're doing with the national office so that we can all circulate and learn from each other. So now I'm going to introduce, actually I've just got one more. I'm just going to quickly read out another message. It's from, I think it's Sandy, says we have to fight injustice and inequality wherever we see it. So now I'm going to introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker is, let me just see who we've got on our list, is Matt Wrack, and Matt is the General Secretary of the FBU, which is a Fire Brigade Union. So Matt, over to you.
Thanks very much. Good evening, comrades, and thanks for inviting me to this this meeting. It's great to see, and I think it's been a very unusual TUC, a bit weird to be frank, and I think the Fringe meetings like this will have certainly livened it up. I think the experience of the Black Lives Matter campaign in the United States and internationally over the past year has really rocked political establishments all across the world. And it has raised very fundamental questions about our society, our history, and our future, and what sort of world we want to live in. And it has really been inspirational. Just as an aside, just as a starting point, in 2008, I had the great privilege of speaking on a platform with John Carlos, who of course gave with Tommy Smith, the famous Black Power salute, the clenched fist salute in the 1968 Olympics. And I think two heroic figures who were then victimized, saw their careers attacked and wrecked as a result of standing up for justice. And we've seen similar things in the emergence of the Black Lives Matters campaign, with sporting figures having the opportunity and taking the chance to make similar statements, perhaps most famously Colin Kaepernick from 2016 onwards. So this has been emerging for some time and reflects deep-seated anger, particularly in the United States, at the level of racism and particular police violence against Black and minority citizens. And I think we've seen virtual uprisings in American cities. I mean, I think when we're watching it from the UK, it has been quite staggering to see the scale of the violence of state forces, the violence of the police going out in effectively paramilitary formations, armed to the teeth, against unarmed protesters. And I think of, I work, from the Fire and Rescue Service, and I thought that a very sharp answer to that was that when people demand PPE, for example, in healthcare all across the rich countries of the world, they struggle to get it. Here in Britain, in North America, and so on, people struggle to get that. But when police forces want more guns or more body armor or whatever, they seem to be able to get that without any question. So as I say, this raises some very fundamental questions about the sort of world that we live in. Here in the UK, I think one of the debates at the TUC this week has been around COVID, the impact of COVID in our communities, and how it has disproportionately affected some parts of the community. And as we know that working class people, and particularly Black and minority groups, have been particularly affected by the COVID pandemic. But I think when we dig down into that, you can see actually that reflecting the wider position in society, in that more people from those communities, from those backgrounds, are in what have turned out to be key worker roles, frontline worker roles, whether it's in the health service or elsewhere. Although if you dig into the mortality figures by occupation in relation to COVID, the worst affected single group has been security staff, followed by people working in transport. So interestingly, it has not been in the NHS or social care. It's been in private sector, but private sector employment areas. But interestingly, also areas where I think we would expect to see, and we will see, large numbers of low-paid jobs, deregulated jobs, and also large numbers of Black and minority workers in there. I think the debate in Britain has been interesting to see. We see this remarkable arrogance and complacency from people in the British establishment, that this is somehow, Cameron Johnson seeing this as some sort of American problem, but not a problem here in Britain, completely trying to pretend that Britain doesn't have any history in terms of the establishment, creation and recreation of racism. And I think that's why some of the direct action, including the toppling of statues, has thrown that into sharp relief. And I think we do need to examine, and we need to, I think, we be arguing that we need to be creating our own education, our own stories, recreating and discovering for new generations the stories of struggle in British history, the stories of struggle against racism, against slavery. In terms of some of the practical things that we can do in the trade union movement, just finish on a couple of points there from my own experience in the Fire Brigade Union. We are in a very male-dominated industry. We're in an industry that is overwhelmingly white, where there is significant underrepresentation of Black workers in our industry. And that creates lots of challenges for us. One of the initiatives that we have taken is to do solidarity work around migrants and asylum seekers. And we have a member of ours in Nottinghamshire who's actually for years been undertaking solidarity work in the Mediterranean, including working on some of the rescue ships. And we organised a Fringe meeting at our annual conference where he spoke to a packed meeting. And I have to say it was quite a remarkable and emotional event, because virtually the whole room was in tears at some of the stories that Brendan was able to share with us. And out of that, we've established links with KEERFA Calais, and we've taken groups of firefighters across to Calais to work with refugees there, and of course then encourage them to have that discussion back in the workplace when they've come back. And it's something that has changed people's, I think probably changed people's lives in terms of the experience that they've seen, the experiences that people have relayed to them in those in the camps in Calais, and how it has either changed their views in some way, but confirmed that it was the right thing to do. So I think there are many practical things that we can do in the trade union movement to build on that, to share our experiences, because I think there are some fantastic opportunities arising out of the struggles of the past year or so. But of course, those opportunities will not be there forever, and we have to seize the opportunity while it does exist, organise together, and challenge racism across society, but also in our own workplaces, and make sure that we're building a genuine working class, labour movement orientated anti-racist movement for the coming years. Thank you very much.
Matt, thanks so much for that. And I'm just going to read out a few more messages. But before I do that, I just want to make a quick announcement. In case people don't know, we will be joined tonight by an anti-racist campaigner, Petros, who is based in in Lesbos, the island of Lesbos. So he'll be joining us shortly. So do all stay on and keep sending in your comments. I'm just going to read out a few more of what we've got. So John Wood says solidarity for Portsmouth Local Government Unison and Portsmouth Trades Council. We've also got a message here from Christian, a solidarity from Brighton University, UCU. We need multiracial working class unity against racism and the Tories. And it's worth saying we're getting a lot of messages. There's clearly a lot of anger against the Tories right now. We've also got a message from John McFadden. Racism is more lethal and corrosive than the virus. We've got another message here saying, Elizabeth says, the fight against racism is a fight for us all. Great to hear from Kevin Courtney. Black Lives Matter and trade unions need to do more together. And then we have another message here. Yasmin says, hello from Take the Knee, Sheffield. Helen says, rural racism is a real issue. Black Lives Matter is leading the change. Will says, thanks, Matt. You're a beautiful person and brother. A couple of more messages coming in. We've got Sally says, Matt, taking a fire engine to France full of donations was a stroke of genius for the FBU. So clearly lots of support for all the work that the FBU is doing. So it's fantastic to know that you did that. And obviously all the work that you've done around supporting Grenfell, it's been absolutely amazing. So I do now want to introduce our next speaker. Just to let people know, we were going to be joined by Glen Hart from the RMT, but unfortunately he can't make it. But I am really, really pleased to introduce somebody who is stepping in last minute. Some of you may know him, particularly in the trade union movement, because we've done quite a lot of solidarity work. We have Dalbir Dhillon. He is going to be filling in. He's the RMT Black and Ethnic Advisory Committee. He's a member of that committee. And I don't know if people are aware of this, but a lot of you will be, because I know there were lots of messages of solidarity. But Dalbir was attacked while he was on strike. He was on a picket line, an RMT picket line, and he was attacked by some racist thugs that were walking by that picket line. And we had a great act of solidarity, I think, particularly in Manchester, but across the trade union, which was so important. But Dalbir is going to step in now. So Dalbir, over to you.
Hi, thank you. Obviously, it is a very last minute, so I've not had anything really prepared, so you're going to have to bear with me here. But thank you, obviously, for the invite, and obviously, Glen Hart sends his apologies. Obviously, I know you quite well, Nahala, from when we met. Funny enough, I actually remember the date when everyone came down, the 27th of January, 2019, just last year, when everyone turned around and showed up in solidarity, because a week before that, I'd been on strike in defence of the role of the Guard on trains for people's safety, 2 years, 47 days of strike action. And the police at the time were babysitting, I guess that's the word to use, a bunch of individuals, I think, protesting vegan sausage rolls or something or other. And these people were led in front of our picket. They recognised one of our trade union officials, Darren Ireland, turned around and started giving him abuse. And when I turned around and said something to get them to stop, I pretty much started getting a load of racist abuse, and I guess insinuations were made about the colour of my skin, that I was a pedophile, and all these other things. A video of it was actually posted by them on something called Tommy Robinson News, and got quite a few death threats out of it, so that was fun. But yeah, I guess what I want to turn around and start on first is obviously, I guess all this at the moment, obviously we'd be doing this face to face, but COVID-19 has turned around and really thrown a spanner in the works. And it's something that's, I guess, made me turn around and think quite a lot, because there was something, funny enough, it was called Madonna turned around and said that COVID is the great equalizer. I mean, I have to be honest with you, it's an absolute lie. The idea that COVID is some equalizer, that it's equally apparent that it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, your position of wealth or influence or power, that you are the same, that you are all affected the same. It isn't the case. I work as a local trade union rep here in Manchester, and we are seeing it firsthand about the disparity. You're seeing it within Black, Asian, minority, ethnic community. You're seeing firsthand what's happening, higher proportion of deaths, you're more likely to contract it, more likely to have complications based on whether you are white or not. And it's funny that when people turn around and talk about it, I mean, the government even turned around and did a report into it, although they've not released everything, no surprise there. I mean, even they themselves turn around and state it quite clearly that analysis, when you turn around and look into things for sex, age, deprivation and region, people of Bangladeshi ethnicity, example, twice as likely to die from it than if you were white. And it was between 10 to 50% high risk of death for people of Chinese, Indian, Pakistani, other Asian, Black Caribbean and other Black people. You got between 10 and 50% chance of dying from this. So the idea that this is a great equalizer is not. But I mean, even more so, especially with the higher amount of deaths that Matt alluded to, with the transport sector. We are seeing a massive amount of deaths occurring within that situation. Bus workers have had deaths. There was the death of Sister Belly Majinga, obviously rest in power. It's insane, and especially with the privatized system, it's even worse so, because he made an interesting point about talking about how there'd been a higher amount of deaths in transport than there had been within the NHS. And I think the way you've got to look at it is that the NHS is what we have as an akin to a religion here. There is a massive outcry when they aren't provided the PPE, as we're finding out from our kleptocratic government only too well, that people aren't happy with it. It's a shame we elected them in the first place, but there you go. But I think what people are failing to understand from this is that these are private companies. Their main concern has and always will be profit. They are not concerned with the risk that comes to us. They will play with their fancy words to say, oh no, we will do all the risk assessments. We will turn around and try and care for you as much as we can. We will turn around and do everything in our power to protect you. But the truth of it, including my own company as a case in point, and I'm probably going to put myself in a bit of trouble here, but so be it. My own company is so far pushing to turn around and have us resuming revenue duties on a train. Telling us that surgical masks are appropriate. Our union policy is FFP2 mask as a minimum, which protects both you and other people, whereas a surgical mask will only protect others from you. You've also got the fact that, especially across the trade union movement at the moment, video conferencing like this has stifled us, especially in terms of dealing with racism and fascism, especially right now. I mean, you're seeing within the news where certain right-wing groups are turning around and going to hotels in Birmingham, knocking on doors, turning around and asking, are they paying customers, or are they people who are refugees? These are people who are fleeing horrific persecution, depravity, and actually a lot of it, weirdly enough, actually caused by this government government of the United States, Saudi Arabia. It's caused by these governments. We sell arms to Saudi Arabia, which is effectively using it to bomb Yemen into the Stone Age. We're seeing the issues that occurred, obviously Syria, Libya, we saw happen in Syria with the Kurds as well. The fact is, these are people turning around and fleeing severe persecution, and these people need our help. They don't need right-wing fascists turning around and knocking on their doors, turning around and telling them they're not welcome, because I'm sorry, they are welcome. They are very much welcome, because they come here, they turn around and just, through no choice of their own, no one turns around and chooses to flee their home. That's what it is. But I mean, you're seeing this with certain groups, Britain First, you're seeing it even across the EU. You're seeing it with parties like the AfD in Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland, who are turning around and having their voice heard more, to your strong men of Europe, like your Viktor Orbáns, and even worldwide, your Jair Bolsonaros, your Trumps. And actually, I'm going to put Boris in the same group, because Boris effectively is just, the dollar version of Donald Trump. He's a cheap knockoff, but he is exactly the same. These people do not care about whether you are black, Asian, or anything else. All they're concerned with is pretty much making money. And even if that means our death, so be it. I mean, it's difficult, because I would like to say that the trade union movement has turned around and done enough over the years to turn around and try and challenge this, try and be better. But even the history of the trade union movement isn't exactly a clean, nice, easy one. There are instances from Asquith Saviour back in the 60s who turned around and fought the colour bar at London Euston, informal agreements between local trade union reps and management to turn around and stop people of colour turning around and coming onto the railways. The trade union movement has a lot to do and has a part to play, and it can always do more. This isn't a case of always turning around and just saying, we're just going to sit there and do nothing. We just need to be doing more. As a trade union movement, we do need to be doing more, especially now, because it's only going to get harder, and it's a fight that we have to win, because if we don't, the alternative is a lot worse. Thank you very much.
Dalbir, thanks so much for that. And just to say, we're getting messages of support in based on what you've just said. And Pete has just messaged to say solidarity with Dalbir. And he goes on to say, if the trade unions can mobilise hundreds of thousands for anti-austerity demos a few years ago, why didn't they do the same against racism? And then we have Elizabeth who says London transport bus drivers were initially not allowed to wear masks. That's absolutely shocking to hear, isn't it? Yet again, they're putting their profits before our health. Joy says we need to help refugees. Sheena says excellent speech. I think she's referring to Matt. Care and solidarity for Calais. The FBU is such an important organisation. And Claire says solidarity from Euston Tower PCS. So now I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is an NHS worker and part of Unite Scotland BAME committee, and it's Fayrouz Kraish. Hello.
Thanks, Nahla. Sorry, it's Fayrouz Kraish. Thank you so much for having me today. We have now lived with COVID pandemic for almost 7 months, and it certainly has been a trial for all of us, to say the least. During this time, many issues such as socioeconomic austerity and racism has been in the forefront. I'm a biomedical scientist in haematology and blood transfusion department within the NHS, which is an established institution that I'm so proud to work for. Unfortunately, like many public sectors, austerity has taken its toll. With lack of beds, staff, equipment and PPE, it's a wonder how the NHS has coped during this pandemic. However, for it to cope, many services and treatments were put on hold or cancelled in order to treat COVID patients. The birth of the NHS occurred post-war Britain, where there was huge employment gaps within the public sectors, such as the NHS. It was the people from the new Commonwealth countries, such as people from Caribbean, the South Asian countries, and later people from the Middle East, Africa, and Europe filled these gaps to continue to serve Britain and its people. Migrants have certainly contributed to the NHS from the time of its birth to the present day, where they make 44% of the workforce. It's also worth noting that ethnic minorities make up 80% of private companies hired by the NHS, such as ISS, that doesn't provide the same benefits as the NHS does to its own staff. Unfortunately, the NHS has lost hundreds of dedicated staff to COVID-19, where 64% are of ethnic minority. Ethnic minorities make up 19% of the British population, and yet 34% from this background were hospitalised with COVID-19 infection. This disproportionate effect of COVID infections have raised alarming questions as to why. We know that people of ethnic minority background constitute a disproportionately higher number of key frontline workers, such as in public transport, drivers, cleaners, carers, band five nurses, etc., are more likely to come from private areas and live in overcrowded housing. The socioeconomic problems would make anyone vulnerable to contracting COVID-19. One of the questions raised is the NHS an institution that is fundamentally racist? However, does racism exist in pockets in all our communities? Sadly, yes. As we can see, there is a lot of talk around racial lines, which is one of the ugly assets of society. Though we are all aware of this ugly facet of society, solutions to overcome them seem to be unclear. Throughout this pandemic, politicians and the media focus on the genetics of ethnic minorities. They are more susceptible to having an underlying health condition compared to their white counterparts. And it seems to be, this is the answer to the wake of the disproportionate effect of COVID on ethnic minority. So somehow someone's ethnicity and colour has become a medical condition. I believe this is a way to deviate people's minds from questioning the socioeconomic problems and the systematic discrimination in workplaces, in schools, and in society in general. And it's also a result of the hostile environment that we're experiencing. My ethnicity is certainly not a condition, and my genetics is certainly not inferior to my white counterparts. As called by anti-racism to tackle and explain this disparity, a full, independent and transparent investigation must look at all factors within a workplace that make staff unsafe. For example, looking at lack of PPE, is there overrepresentation of ethnic minorities working in the front line, especially in COVID wards? Racial politics is harmful as it creates the them and us mentality, black versus white sentiment, and this is ultimately unhelpful and divisive. Rather, we should focus our attention on a message that is almost as old as the NHS itself, which came from Martin Luther King, reminding us all of our human obligation to others. So rather than highlighting colour, religion, gender and sexuality, we must fine-tune our language, whether it's through work or our daily conversation. It's to be mindful that we are all human beings and that we have equal rights. And when those rights are not respected, there needs to be an effective grievance procedure where the person feels that they are being heard and that their human rights are respected. We must view one another as human beings rather than a national statistic and a colour. All NHS staff, porters, nurses, scientists, cleaners, admin, doctors, they've all contributed to serving patients in order for people to receive the best care that everyone deserves to make them well. From the start of the pandemic, frontline staff had to compromise their life and families to treat COVID patients. When patients were unable to be comforted and held by their loved ones, nurses and other staff were there to hold their hand and give comforting words. Many couldn't even go home to their families for a period of time from fear of infecting them. The dedication of NHS staff and the appreciation of the public for them must be reflected by the government's commitment to rectify the austerity they inflicted on the NHS for over 10 years. One of the things that they could do is lift wage restraint and open pay discussions as called by many unions. Over 10 years, pay in real term has seen staff pay drop by up to 20%. And I believe that private contractors should also, like ISS, should also open pay discussions with their staff too. But most importantly, every single NHS staff member has to be treated equally fair and feel that they have a safe working environment. I advise everyone, especially ethnic minority workers, to join the union and let your concerns be known and to know your rights. Your voices are important and we must unite to make a change. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. Thanks so much for that, Fayrouz. So just to let you know, we've got a message here from Tala Ahmed. She says, solidarity from Stand Up to Racism in Scotland, justice for Showunmi and all other victims of racism, Black Lives Matter, refugees and migrants, welcome here. And we've also got a message from Carol who says, migrants make our NHS. So thanks so much for all those messages that are coming in. I'm just going to introduce our next speaker. Like I said, we are joined tonight from an anti-racist campaigner in Greece from an anti-racist organisation called KEERFA, and it's Petros who's going to say a few words. So Petros, over to you.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I just traveled in the morning to Lesbos Island, where the camp of Moria was on fire and 13,000 refugees were really thrown from the hell of Moria to the hell of the streets now of Lesbos. They are living in terrible situations. The last 5 days, there are just on the street women with their children. And we have all the races of the government insisting that these people, they cannot move from the Lesbos Island to Piraeus and to the mainland. They insist that they will build a new detention center, a new mass prison in this island. This is the result of the European Union policy, the result of Fortress Europe. They decided to close the borders between the Turkey and Europe. There is the agreement between European Union and Turkey, which forces the refugees to stay in detention centers and also to be geographically isolated in the islands. The geographical isolation is really a shame. It reminds us of what was happening in South Africa with apartheid. They don't give them the right even to move from Lesbos Island to Piraeus. So today there was a huge demonstration organized by the local labor center and also the public workers union with the demand that the refugees, they should have the right to move immediately. I think that what's happening here is has to be on the focus of all workers around Europe. We are in the period of pandemic, but also in a rising economic crisis. And the governments now, they're scapegoating refugees. On the Greek islands. So we really have to stay together. We have to.
Petros, you're breaking up. Can you still hear us?
Sorry?
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. Do you want to just repeat what you were just saying? Okay, we seem to have lost Petros. We're just going to try getting him back. Okay, what we might do, what I'm going to suggest we do is we go on to the next speaker, and then hopefully Petros can continue. He can come back afterwards, and we can continue with what he was saying. But obviously, he's been traveling today, and he's over at the island, so it's probably not a great situation for him trying to connect. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker, and it's Victoria Sherman, and she's a UCU Black Workers Committee Chair and part of the NEC for the UCU. So Victoria, over to you.
Hi everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. Oops, I think the light's on me here. I'm also very conscious that Pedro might come back in. So if he comes back in, will I step out, Nahela?
Hopefully, Victor, we'll get to the end of you and then we'll bring him back if he can come.
Oh, okay, because I know that he's had to step out to do something afterwards. Okay, so I just want to really just give you a few things. And I'm going to just break it down into 3 things, really. Who am I? What do I do? And also how and why does it matter? I'm an academic, so that's the first thing. I'm based at UCL, and I'm also, my particular research is in the area of gender, race, class, and identity. I focus mostly on women, and I'll come to that point in a moment. I grew up in rural area, which is Somerset mainly, and then Ramsgate in its latter parts. I now live on the suburbs of London. How do I connect to what everybody else is saying? But I'm part of UCU, and I've just got the result from the campaign which I've been part of, which I came second as the VP for higher education. So I didn't get that one, but that would have been the first Black person, but that wasn't the case. So I'm currently on the NEC at UCU, and I'm also the chair for the interim chair at the moment. And I'm also the chair of equality and also the chair of the Black Members Standing Committee. I say that because I think it's important for you to know that the officer role I take within UCU. Now, UCU is a union that is for further education, adult education, prison education, and also higher education. So it is the one which is post-education, and that's really, really important. Now, the issues of equality are something which is part of my DNA, I suppose, really. And it is something which I embrace with every single thing I do. I speak up, and speaking up links to a lot of what people have said already. To disrupt the notion of whiteness is really, I suppose, part of what I do. Because it surrounds us all in everything we do within our lives, especially if you're a person of colour. Now, I noticed that many people mentioned George Floyd and what happened to him, which was a drastic situation. And I think perhaps, looking at that was more to do with also that people were off work and COVID. And so they were looking more without a rushing around and had to really kind of concentrate. But what we haven't mentioned throughout is the loss of the Black women. There's many women which have been murdered by the police. There's many women who have been sectioned by the police and by other people. And I think we mustn't forget the voices of them. Now, Black women's experiences is not documented as much as Black males. Their voices seem to just fade out into the distance. And more needs to be done about this. Our voices count as women. Much of the work which is done with gender is normally focused on white women. And then it's an afterthought if they're challenged to include something on women of colour. I've been campaigning, as I said to you already, in relation to the VPHE, hoping that they would make a difference because there's quite a lot of Black colleagues now which are high up in the union. Let me move on to something else, which I think is also something I want to talk about, is the terminology of BAME. I feel very insulted when people continue to use BAME because that doesn't do anything. And it doesn't do anything because if you look at it in the research points, because you can't actually statistically work out anything from the term BAME. And it wasn't something which was given to, it wasn't something which we as people of colour or Black people actually decided on. It was given down the line by white people. So we need to stop using it. There's campaigns about it to stop using it. And I think TUC need to stop and make a stand to stop using the term BAME. Now that might be small in the midst of things, but I think it's a really important point, especially when you're on the sharp end of trying to look at data, or when you're trying to look at which people you're talking about when you use the terminology of BAME. When we think about attainment and we look at attainment of our Black students within further education, higher education, adult education, there is some real issues. I did some research in prison education. Didn't know how disgruntled, how disadvantaged our prison residents are with getting access to education, especially if you're Black as well. The other thing I wanted to also mention, which we haven't mentioned at all, is health and mental health. Mental health of the student population and staff population from Black members is something which needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed in a big way. And I don't think that the government's even had even thought about the what will happen once they start to get some kind of grips of testing and tracking, or whatever they're trying to do. But the aspect of the impact of mental health once things start to really open up will be actually huge, and that will also impact our black colleagues within the Black community. So why does all this matter? What I'm trying to say, I suppose it's stand up to racism and what that actually means. With everyday racism. Everyday racism is that hit you get every single minute of the day. And some people might say, oh, it doesn't really matter, it's just something small. But when you have a collection of it, and it collectively keeps going and going, whether you're 5 years of age or whether you're 55 or 100 years of age, it still gets you in the same way, and it's painful. It's painful, and it is collective in many ways as well. And let me give you an example. Just today, I parked my car to pick my daughter up outside someone's house. Now, the house just was a driveway, but I was sitting there talking on the phone. And a man came out and he said, and I thought he wanted me to move. I said, oh, would you like me to move my car? I'm sorry if I'm sitting there. No, what he wanted to do is give me a load of abuse. And he gave me a load of abuse, and you could see the fear in his eyes as he was giving me the abuse. So I said to him, okay, you don't need to be so aggressive. Of course, even if you want me to move my car, it's not a problem for me. But what he'd done, he'd had loads of other people perhaps who'd parked there. But what was interesting about that is that you know that he wanted to give some horrible words. And he did in the end. When my daughter turned up, he started to F and blind at me. Now, the difference is that he was an Asian man. And what we don't talk about that. We don't talk about racism, which happens between our communities. It was absolutely rife. And you think to yourself, well, we talk about what happens with white and Black, but we don't talk about what happens when the Asian person is deciding to call you a few words because of who you are. So I think that's something which needs to unpack as well. I think one of the colleagues, I'll end soon, but one of the colleagues mentioned something about the union itself. And I think the union, UCU, has a lot to do yet. They've got a lot of work to do when it comes to racism. They've got a lot of work to do when it comes to anything to do with discrimination. There was a lot of work which was on the equality pay, the gender pay gap. Lots and lots of stuff was done around that. When it came to the ethnic pay gap, it's just small amounts of work. And it's like it's underneath the stone. And even having the discussions about Blackness and anti-Black races, anti-racism and what that means in the union, it becomes very, very difficult. So I think there's more to do. There's lots to do. We do need to join up. We need to join up collaboratively to make things happen. Even in your own Black grouping, there are differences, and which is fine because we're not a homogenous group, but we need to work how we can ensure that we're going for the right thing. We're all standing there together to make change happen. We're not about fighting with each other, it's about making change happen. And I say this because if we don't start doing that, it's where the whiteness starts to creep in, and we lose the thread of unionists that we need to support and work with our colleagues to ensure that they also understand that the union is there for them. And it's not just there for people which are not Black, or they're not from any other background, which is not white and British. So these are the things I wanted to say. I really hope that the discussion continues. I say Breonna Taylor is one of the names, which was the most recent person who was shot in America. And of course, people are now getting picked up for saying her name because of the fact that they don't want to understand that the racism is absolutely real when it comes to everything with our daily lives. I think that's all I want to say. And I want to say thank you very much for allowing me to say a few words. And what I will also say is keep disrupting, keep disruption, the notion of whiteness, whether it's in the curriculum that you're involved with, whether it's to do with everyday work or whatever it is, one has to disrupt it to make change happen. I'm not a Martin Luther person, but I am a Malcolm X. And by any means necessary, it's time to make sure that we have a change. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, Victoria. That was fantastic. Now, I am going to bring Petros in because we've now got him back. But just before I do that, just to let you know, Victoria, we're getting lots of messages on the back of what you said, lots of support for what you're saying. And we've got here a message from Paul who says, Victoria does great work. I've seen her talk at the Black Women's Forum. We've also got someone saying, Helen says, thanks, Victoria. Thanks for speaking out about how Black women experience racism. So thanks very much for your comments. And I do want to bring Petros back now. Petros, over to you.
Okay, sorry for the interruption, but I'm in a very difficult point. There is an assembly with a lot of people who want to organize a solidarity. We're just after the demonstration of the trade unions. So what we face here is the consequences of the policy of Europe, how they close the border. And what we try to build and what we try to organize is through the power of the trade unions of this country to stop these racist policies. One of the main demands that we have now is for free movement of all refugees and an end to detention centers. We say no concentration camps in this country, in the islands, in the mainland, and whenever. And we also support that there is enough space for all. There are houses, there are closed hotels now in Greece, especially after the crisis in tourism caused by the economic crisis and also the pandemic. So now there is a movement in Greece. There are mass solidarity demonstrations demanding the immediate end of the isolation of refugees in the islands. This is very important as a demand because especially the workers' movement in Greece now faces a big challenge with coronavirus and with the pandemic and the economic crisis. The government is scapegoating the refugees and the migrants, but on the same time, they are now in the fierce competition with Turkey about the control of resources, and they are buying new weapons, new Rafale aircrafts from France, and so on. This competition is very dangerous. It leads to war, and it spreads the war from Middle East to the area of Europe. And for us, it is very important now, the mass solidarity with the refugees and the mass movement that is going around not only in Greece, but also in Germany and in a lot of European countries. So the Greek trade unions are in big campaigns the last years in solidarity with the refugees. And also the refugees, they should have access to public health. The challenging point in Moria and why we arrived to this situation is that after the identification of 35 infected by coronavirus, the authorities decided to isolate them in a warehouse in the most terrible situation. So that was the spark of this clashes and the anger that ended in this burning of the Moria camp. So Now, we need solidarity for this. And we need also the support of trade unions in Europe that demand to end the common agreement between European Union and Turkey, closing the border and cancelling the right for asylum by giving the right to police authorities to detain refugees for 18 months. I think it's a very crucial point. A lot of workers from different countries, they try to arrive at Europe, and what they face is the closed borders and racism. So that's one issue that I want to call for your solidarity. And the second is that, you know, for years in Greece, we are fighting against the neo-Nazis of Golden Dawn. In the period of 2000 until 2013, they built their force, they got 7% and they entered the Greek parliament. But also they were able to organize mass attacks against the refugees and migrants. They murdered the musician Pavlos Fyssas, Shahzad Lukman, Pakistan worker, and thousands were stamped. After a big revolt in 2013, when Pavlos Fyssas was murdered, just 7 years before, I mean, this happened in September 2013, the Greek trade unions, after the matter of Pavlos Fyssas, they called a general strike, and then government was forced to come to a crackdown against the neo-Nazis. Is it okay with the connection?
Yes, we can still hear you.
Yeah, sorry. So the Greek trade unions, they called a general strike, and this was a turning point that the government was forced to come to a crackdown against the neo-Nazis. They were captured, all the parliamentary group, and they were put in prison for 18 months. And now, after 5 years and they have their trial, 68 of them, they were trial for organizing a criminal organization for racist murders. Now, after 5 years and a half and 430 summits of the court, the trial has finished. And on 7th of October, we are waiting for the announcement of for the decision of the court. This is very important because what we demand is that all of them, they should end in the prison. They should be characterized as a criminal organization. But in this period, the neoliberal government is opening the way for the fascists, and so it is very dangerous that they are putting the pressure on the court not to give them heavy sentences. So this is a big provocation for the democratic, the workers, and the anti-fascist and the anti-racist movement. So on 7th of October, the Greek Public Workers Union, ADV, they called 3 hours general strike. And a lot of trade unions, local trade unions of the teachers, the hospital workers, they are calling for participation. So we're going to build a mass mobilization at that morning. And we need also international solidarity. We need some delegations of the trade unions to be present in the audience of this trial. And because now this trial was a very heavy burden on the anti-fascist movement, we also need your financial support. It was a disaster for us to support 5 years and a half the lawyers in this trial. And finally, it is very important for the international anti-fascist movement if we arrive to a decision that really dismantles Golden Dawn. Golden Dawn was in 2013 the rising star for all the fascists internationally. So this star should be brought down now, and the decision of the trial will be very important for that. In this period of economic crisis and the neoliberal attack by the government, they are trying to regroup. We saw just 1 week ago, there was a very big attack of some splits of Golden Dawn against the migrant peasant workers, mainly from Pakistan, in Crete. This was a pogrom, and it is very important that our movement the workers' movement and the fascist movement were joining forces. So for us, the big success that we had last year, that we kicked out from the parliament, the Golden Dawn, is not the end of the story. They are reviving the fascists because of the policy of the government that is playing the card of racism. But we are optimistic because there is a lot of participation from trade unions. A lot of people in Greece are also inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States. And we have this slogan, Refugee Lives Matter. And there are a lot of solidarity mobilizations going around. So I want to send my greetings to you. It was very important to listen the women speaker just before me from the hospitals and from the trade unions arguing that we have to raise very high the fight against the racism. And for us this month, it was a big attack against the Albanian women worker in the schools, that the government decided to make new contracts by excluding the non-Greek nationals. And we're very proud to say that just yesterday, after a big mobilization in Athens municipality, where I'm councillor, we won this battle. And we're optimistic that the trade unions, they have the power to make sure that the unity of the workers of different color, of different nationalities, it can be preserved by their own actions and their own struggle. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thanks very much, Petros. That was fantastic. We have just got a couple of more speakers and then we'll be wrapping up, but it is worth saying that throughout tonight's meeting, we've had over 250 people joining from Facebook and YouTube. So it's been absolutely fantastic, and hopefully it'll inspire us to continue building the movement here. So now I want to introduce Jed, who's from Show Racism Red Card, and he's going to say a few words. Are you?
Hi there, everybody. Yeah, I just want to bring greetings from Show Racism Red Card and explain why we work obviously with the trade union movement, but also with Stand Up Against Racism. Show Racism Red Card, as Shaka said at the beginning of this meeting, was established 25 years ago with the aim of combating racism, not within football, but within society through education. And that's why we believe tonight's meeting and other meetings that we've done with Stand Up Against Racism are so important, that we link up with the trade union movement. And it's been the trade union movement's been the backbone of our organisation ever since we were set up. Initially it was Unison. All the unions have come on board over the years to help us get the anti-racist message across. Not just to young people, but more and more we're working with adults and educating adults in not just the trade union movement, but in a whole range of different areas. In terms of the discussion we've had tonight, I just want to contribute a few things. Kevin Courtney stole my whole speech, so I've had to write it again. The Black Lives Movement has been an absolute inspiration, but I think we've got to say it hasn't come out of nowhere, and not just in the US, but in the UK. So we, if you look back at the last 30 or 40 years of anti-racism, we've made huge progress in fighting racism in the UK, and we've led the way in many ways in the Anti-Nazi League, in other campaigns. The campaign certainly in football has been an inspiration of combating racism within football, and taking football from what it was, which is where the National Front used to sell their papers, where the far right used to recruit, to an area now where you've got a far better position within the game of football. But generally speaking, we've had 10 years, I would say, of going backwards, and again, that's not because of anti-racism. It's because of the message of hostility. Everyone has been mentioning this towards refugees, hostility towards asylum seekers. It's been going now for well over 15 years. It wasn't a Conservative government, it was a Labour Home Secretary that came up with the phrase the hostile environment. It was a conscious policy to demonise immigrants, and yet immigrants have ran our country. immigrants run the NHS as the nurse, as the health worker from Scotland has told us 44% of health workers. But the demonisation of migrants, of immigrants, has certainly been upgraded in recent years with the go home bans of Theresa May, and of course the horrendous Windrush scandal. So it hasn't come out of nowhere. We've also had Islamophobia. And to show us some red card, in every survey we've done for young people have been saying to the government and to anybody who'll listen that racism for the last 10 years has been getting worse. Austerity has made it worse as well, cuts, but institutionalized racism is getting worse. And I think, Shaka said this at the beginning, other speakers have said it, COVID and the current pandemic we're in is actually been an eye-opener for a lot of people because, it's showed in one sense that a society can come together. On the other side, the lowest paid workers are the most at risk, and that's reflected obviously in the figures for Black people dying of COVID, 4 times more likely to die. But the key workers who've led us in this pandemic that we've clapped originally in the beginning of the pandemic, that we've got to start now standing shoulder to shoulder with those workers. The migrant workers, as I said, have contributed so much. Now, the murder of George Floyd has been a sea change, and I just want to say a few words on that. I've never experienced a movement like in my lifetime, in terms of Black and white young people coming together and older people, predominantly young people. I live in Whitley Bay, not far from Newcastle. And there's a young lad, Raj, who's just started working for Showunmi Night Party, who's led the movement here. And I saw him on television, and I jokingly said, nobody told me about these demonstrations, but the demonstrations were magnificent. Lots of brand new young people on the demonstrations, but unity of Black and white workers together and fighting racism. I also think sports stars throughout the world have played a fantastic role. America in particular, but I want to highlight, I don't want to highlight the footballers, I want to highlight Lewis Hamilton. Because again, I think he is making at the moment a stand against Formula One, a stand for that I think it is inspirational, not only to other athletes, but also to the younger generation. And there are many other individuals who are making that stand, but I think this movement is inspirational and has to see change. I'm sure it's my card calling for, and it was great to hear Kevin Courtney from the NAU talking about anti-racism on the national curriculum. We need more Black history in education, not just a Black History Month, but Black history throughout the year and in the national curriculum. But we also need young people to be taught anti-racism, and that's what Shurist and Red Card are calling for. But I think at the moment, the bigger challenge is equality right across the board, because we need to be looking at why in 2020 Black people have the worst jobs, the worst conditions, and are now going to be facing, after being key workers in the pandemic, the dole, and we're looking at mass unemployment. I think I made 3 references now to Kevin Courtney, so sorry, Kevin, but my 3rd reference, because you did steal me speech, is that I think you're totally right to point out the far right are waiting, and they're not really waiting, because even during the pandemic, we've had Farage on in his dinghy and in the trying to stop migrants, immigrants, in the channel. But we will see more and more of the far right, and also of the UKIP and other right-wing forces using and blaming immigrants for the unemployment we're about to see, and for the other crisis is there in the economy. And I think it's key that the trade unions lead that fight. And it's not just, as I say, a fight for education, it's a fight for our lives. And I think it was Wilf who said at the beginning of this discussion that this debate is about the world we want, and I totally echo them sentiments. Do we want a world, we always say this to young people in the classroom, do you want a world of Donald Trump, where you build walls and you stop people moving? Or do you want a world where you can travel the world, you can see the world, you can learn from other cultures, you can learn from other religions? I know what kind of world I want, but we've got to make sure that Donald Trump and the far right don't get the kind of world they want. And Showunmi and Red Card are very proud, as I say, to stand with you tonight and doing that. One final shameless plug is that we have a Solidarity Day 4-hour campaign. We'll wear Red Day. The trade unions are backing it. We'll have a launch of it with Unite and the other trade unions next Thursday at 2 o'clock. But please take part by wearing red on Friday, the 16th of October. And I thank you for your time.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Jed. Thank you so much. You wouldn't know that you just had to redo your speech on the spot. That was fantastic. And we've just got lots of messages of support. I'm going to read a couple before we bring in a final speaker. So Elizabeth says, great to see Jed always on point. Show race in the red card, do brilliant work. And then another one from Colin Walker, who says, inspiring to hear leading trade unionists and campaigners talking about the resistance in the community and the workplace to racism in the COVID era. Our unions have a key role to play in the struggle. So I think everyone would agree it's been an absolutely fantastic meeting, and hopefully this will inspire us to continue to build the movement. And it is really important to say that. We've seen, hundreds of thousands of people out in the streets, and really this isn't just people being angry, and it's not a moment of anger, but building a mass movement against racism and building the resistance. And I want to now introduce our final speaker, who's going to hopefully pull it all together and inspire us to continue to build in our local areas. So it's Weyman Bennett, who is one of the co-conveners of Stand Up to Racism.
Hello, I want to thank all the speakers. I'm speaking on behalf of Sabby, Dhalu and myself, who's the co-convener of Stand Up to Racism. I want to start off by thanking I want to thank both the General Secretaries that spoke. I want to particularly, I want to thank Kevin for his speech. I want to thank Matt for his speech. I think I've been going to the TUC for 25 years, I think, which ages me, whatever it is. And I think that over those years, I want to start off by saying I went when Stephen Lawrence's family came to the TUC and asked for support, and they got it. I went when the National BNP was trying to build in Barking and Dagenham, and we built resistance and we beat the BNP. I was there, we got resources in order to build against Tommy Robinson. Neil Ashcraft was part of the people that did it inside the Northwest. And the reason why I'm talking about our successes is because I think that's been built on black and white unity, the trade union movement, resistance, and many of the people who spoke haven't just talked about it, they've put themselves on the line. Jed has been there. I remember in Newcastle when I didn't want to be there, Jed was there. Do you mean? I remember all these people. I mean, everybody on this thing has actually come out together, but I actually think this is the most dangerous time that we face. And I think that, I want to first be absolutely clear. I think that the Black Lives Matter movement is really important, but we should be clear about this. Racism is coming from the top. There's a choice of this government. I think we're facing a catastrophic situation economically over the end of the furlough. I think we're facing a situation in which there'll be more deaths from COVID. I think that youth unemployment is at a scale that I can only remember as a child. And I'll tell you this, we have a choice. I think I'm so glad that we showed resistance and put the blame where it's worth. But we need to have these organizations now to stand up against racism, because to be honest, when they're saying they're sending the Royal Navy into the Channel, not to pick up people, but to try and criminalize them. And by the way, it is not illegal to seek asylum. That's what KEERFA Calais says. Absolutely. I mean, actually, it's illegal to fight illegal wars. It's actually illegal, to be racist. It's illegal. All these things are illegal, but they are not necessarily enforced. It's illegal for the police to kill people as they do in Britain. I went to America, but I tell you what, I've been to enough demonstrations in Britain in which people have died. That's the reason why we want an inquiry a public inquiry into the disproportionate deaths. That's what Diane Abbott has led on. I want to say this as well. I mean, I'm sick and tired of Mohammed Salim was murdered in Birmingham. I'm sick and tired of them using divide and rule as a way of organizing. We are faced with a generation. I think what shocked them about the Black Lives Matter movement is how unified it is. Yes, it's led by black generals, but it's a multiracial army. And actually they're demanding things, that people haven't demanded for very many years. I want to thank Wilf for all the years that he's actually fought to make sure that anti-racism is embedded inside the trade union movement and the way it's been welcomed. I think without that, we wouldn't have had the movement that we've got today. And I think when we talk about our history, we have to remember the two people, Frederick Douglass, who said they used racism to divide each to conquer both. And then also William Cuffery, the origins of the British trade union movement lie in the Chartist movement, a man that led a demonstration in 1848 calling for trade union movement in this country. He was black. I know it's part of our history. And we have to understand that as being part of our history. And some of the demands that we're coming up with are these three demands. We want to make sure that education is reconstructed. We want to make sure that Section 60 is scrapped. And I think that when people talk about the danger of the far right, let's forget in this election, under Donald Trump, we'll see the most filthiest racist campaign. It already is that way, because you can travel across state lines and be armed and kill people. And we have to say that this has to stop. I have a few moments, but I think that the movement that we're part of, the Black Lives Matter movement, the movement of anti-racism, is growing, but also are the movements of those people that are trying to seek to push us back. And that's the reason why I'm glad that, Shaka, who spoke out. I mean, I think the most amazing thing has been the sports people that have spoken out in terms of refusing to be silent about it. I want to thank the UCU for spoke. I was a teacher and a lecturer for many years, and I always felt that unless people fought to make sure that our colleges were anti-racist bastions and our schools were, then we'd be lost, because it's for the future generations to be put out on. And the final thing I'd like to say is that, as well as building inside, I think that a time of solidarity is necessary. I think that the lies that the government is saying around COVID, I mean, only thing that's been tested is my patient, actually, at the moment. There's no test for people. Matt Hancock is living up to his name in terms of a real solution for people. I think that what we're facing is a government that's completely dishonest in the way that it operates, and why we have to have resistance, because we face two things: scapegoating or resistance. And I'm for building the resistance. So I'll end up by, I want to thank all the speakers that have spoken. And I want to say this, the final thing, I want to thank Petros as well, because I'll tell you something, the way the question of how you treat refugees will be how they treat us. Those laws that have been brought in to treat refugees are the laws that are institutionalized to attack everybody. We have an absolute chance to fight back, but this generation will face that fight. I'm glad that people took the knee across the country. They took the knee, not in subjugation, but in resistance. And I think we have to build on that we have to build on what people have said here. I won't repeat it, but I'm glad that we're working with the TUC. It's where our strength is. Unity and solidarity are two weapons that we can use. But we have to understand that our enemies are gathering. And one final warning, I've noticed that they've put black faces in high places. They put Trevor Phillips to say black people should not work, attack Muslims. They put Priti Patel in order to say that black faces are arguing for racism and division. We have to make sure we resist, because actually I think history can repeat itself, as what happened inside the far right, the Holocaust. And we have to say we're against racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and things that divide us in terms of attacks to the Roma. That's what needs to be embedded in our movement. And that's what's given us the victory to defeat the Nazis in the 70s, the BNP in the 80s and the 90s, the English Defence League, the Football Lads Alliance. That solidarity is our weapon that's built into the working class, which is both black and white. And we have to make sure that we have change today. So thanks to all the speakers. I'll keep it short, but those are the things that I think that if we can put into practice will make a difference now. And I'll stop there.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Weyman. And of course, it's been an absolute fantastic meeting. I hope we're all inspired to go away and continue to build the movement in our local areas. And just to remind people that this Saturday, Stand Up to Racism has called a National Day of Action. So we will be doing local events in our areas. So if you're not connected up to a local Stand Up to Racism group, please do get in touch with Stand Up to Racism, the national office, and we can direct you to your local group. Get onto social media. There's all sorts of stuff there that will direct you to what's going on. And if there isn't a local group in your area, please get in touch and we can help you set something up. But let's make sure we continue to take that anger and build a real movement of resistance and actually push back the racists. We've done it in the past. Weyman's talked about all the far right organisations that we have beat and we continue to beat. So well done to everyone that's spoken. Thank you so much for your contributions. Everyone that's been watching at home, thanks very much and stay safe and good night.